I've called this my Blue Plaque Challenge because it's all a sequence of events that happened back in March 2015 that started all this thing going. But to really get a good sort of clue as to how it all fits together, it really is an ongoing piece of work, really, because every time I run the talk, something new has happened. So I'm constantly updating this. So what I'm going to include is all the plaques that currently are already in sight, and you can see 4 of those below. But I'm also going to include the ones that are yet to come, because there is a queue now, and we have progress on some of these ones that are actually just concepts at one time, but they are now full-blown applications. So we start with the first chap. The first building really is this building. And this building dates from, this is number 26, the High Street. But this is how it used to look. It was, in this time, the home of Dr. Benjamin Pugh, born 1715, died 1798. Now, you probably need to look at this building in its present form, and this is it. Now, this was known as the Mansion House, and it was built by Dr. Benjamin Pugh. And this whole story started when I read about this chap called Dr. Pugh, but most people referred to him, historians-wise, as Doctor Who, because nobody knew who he was. And the research started with really digging around at the Essex Record Office, and I was helped an awful lot by the ladies there. And then I started to read up a document written by the president of the British Society of History of Pharmacy, a lady called Janita Burnby. And she had completely researched Dr. Benjamin Pugh and had come up with some really interesting revelations. He was a surgeon, a pioneer in the fields of midwifery and the inoculation of smallpox. Now, he came to Chelmsford, really linking in with one of his devices that he actually developed called the Pugh's pipe. And he got a chap in Chelmsford to make the prototype for him. While he was here, he met a lady called Amy Wall, and she was the widowed daughter of Mr. Sherman Wall, the local apothecary. And he lived at 26, the High Street, not this building, and one before it. Eventually they got married, and part of the marriage settlement allowed them half of the site of number 26, the High Street. Pugh then bought the other half off his brother-in-law, and then promptly had the entire old Sherman Wall's house completely knocked back down, and in its place he had built the Mansion House, and this is the house now. Now, he also at the same time got involved with 2 devices called the curb forceps and the Pugh's pipe. These were his inventions, and they were used to resuscitate newborn babies. At that time, resuscitation prior to being born or just after was something that was thought to be not good practice, but Pugh changed all that. He also, in 1771, got involved with the elders of Chelmsford in relocating the Chelmsford prison, which since 1660 had stood by the stone bridge. But he realised that they were now proposing to put it at the top of the High Street, and he argued that jail fever or tuberculosis could cause an outbreak and cause problems with the market and the trading status of Chelmsford. So he then proposed that they build it back via the stone bridge, where the clean air running down the river would take away the jowl fever. And so this is the building that was built in 1777, a very big building, which was not only a prison, but also a detention house. And to make sure it was built properly, they had a limited workforce, but they used the prisoners to do some of the actual building of the building. So the prisoners built their own prison, which is really quite sweet, really. 1707 saw Pugh move away from the High Street, and he then moved into Great Baddow. He went on a European tour, and he came back to England, and he took up a residence in Milford Castle in Somerset, and he died at the grand age of 83 in 1798. Now, this whole process to get the blue plaque, and there it is on top, you can see it nicely displayed there, that took 27 months to get in place. And so my final arrangements were to get the mayor along. This is Duncan Lumley, and he was along for the day. And just to make sure everybody in the High Street knew what was going on, I called in the services of Tony Appleton, the town crier. And he did the whole event very good justice and dressed up for the occasion. And there is Tony in full regalia. Well done, well done. Right, yes, so this was the first blue plaque. And then City Council, I then started to say to City Council, there's some more to be had here. There's more blue plaques to go up in the High Street, where I think are justified. And they kindly then said, okay, you send us the applications and we will then review whichever ones you think are, I think are appropriate. And then we will arrange to put these up at the council's expense. And well, I was keen for each one to have a nice unveiling ceremony, but they rather did it on the quiet. And I think they might have did it in darkness because they suddenly appeared. So the next one to appear was related to, oh, there's well, that's Benjamin Plu's plaque. You can see that. Yeah, the wording was quite tricky to get on there because they say it's quite busy, but we thought it really did give the right message. And this was taken on the actual desk of the manager of the RBS building before it went up. So yeah, so we got it on the ground as it was. The next chap was John Johnson. John Johnson, really quite a famous man in Chelmsford. The two notable structures for him are Shire Hall and the Stone Bridge. And he was in his time a very competent designer. He tended to, he started really working on a building site in Marylebone called Burns Estate. He must have liked the place because he had a house built there later on. But he was a very competent designer, and he used a new piece of stonework called Code Stone, which was a hard-wearing artificial stone mixed of flint, powdered stone, and clay, and developed by a chap called George Code in Lambeth in 1769. It was a very hard-wearing ceramic, and in fact, it's used still, or was used for a lot of statues in London were using it. Our stone bridge has the balustrades in Code Stone, and Shire Hall has the balconies in Code Stone, as well as the three friezes which are on the top as well. So if I just flip forward, there's the stone bridge and there's the balustrades. Also, these roundels on the side are in Code Stone as well. This is 240 tons of Portland stone, by the way. We think transported to Chelmsford on a horse and cart over Danbury Hill, because it reappeared before the Chelmer and Blackwater navigation was finished. Here's Shire Hall, and these are the code stone decorations on the top, and then the balustrades along under each of the windows, and also the I think tops of these porticos are also code stone as well. So yes, a very grand building, and it looks absolutely fantastic now it's been renovated. Now, the group to actually put this together were the same stonemason George Ray has used for the stone bridge, but the building company was a company called Andrews, Horsfield and Johnson. The Johnson was in fact John Johnson's son, but nobody seemed to really mind because he produced such a grand building. And this replaced what was originally the session house. The session house stood in front of it. The judges decided that the session house would stay in operation the whole time Shire Hall was being assembled, and as a result the workmen had to work in a very limited space of about 18 feet in front of the Shire Hall, and they even, every time that the courts were in session, they had to move all their tools and their tool sheds out the way while the court was in session, and no workmen were to work on the site. So a bit of a problem with trying to run the logistics of building Shire Hall, but they did it. The next chap, there we are, there's John Johnson's plaque, which is actually on Shire Hall, which is really quite nice. Yeah, I think looks very nice on the newly polished stone as well. The next chap is Frank Whitsmore. Now, Frank Whitmore, he was born in Suffolk in 1844, and we know that his actual works, one of his first real accomplishments in Chelmsford, and he came here because he came back from a assignment with the Chinese government because his father's ill health. So he ended up getting a job in Chelmsford. And in 1881, he was the surveyor for the Chelmsford and Blackwater navigation. Not long after that, he actually designed the layout of Central Park, which is really lovely. And also, he later had this building built, which is the police station, the old police station on the side of Waterloo Lane. And this police station has a connection tunnel to Shire Hall and the wing on Shire Hall that he also built as well. I think, though, his finest work is this building, which is the first county hall building. I particularly like the way that he's mixed the light stone with the red. It, to me, really is quite characteristic. And this, I think, is Whitmore's design at his best. Now you can see the blue plaques not on there, but there it is. And in this particular application, they've not drilled into the brick. They put a wooden background on and then put the plaque on there. So it looks quite nice. And this is one of Whitmore's later buildings, and I think he just went from good to even better. This is, by the way, D block of Essex County Council's hall. The next plaque, which I proposed, is not for one man, but for two. And it relates to Frederick Spalding Sr. and Frederick Spalding Jr. And we can see here at number 4 Tyndall Square, the very early Frederick Spalding Sr. building. Frederick Jr. was born here, and he spent his childhood looking out onto Tyndall Square. So absorbed was he in his father's photography business that he then took it over when his father died. But Frederick Spalding Sr. Jr. had other ideas. Number 4 Tyndall Square was not big enough for him. And so this is young Fred Jr. actually picture taken in the studio that was on top of the number 4 Tyndall Square building, but he had eyes on another building, and it was this one. Now, this is number 4, the High Street, and Frederick Spalding Jr. went on to become a well-known photographer, a very prominent retailer, and even the mayor of Chelmsford at one point. By the way, when his father came to Chelmsford, photography was very much in its infancy and a bit of a hobby, really. So what he did was he had other businesses, and we know that he's listed in the 1860s as a furniture restorer and a bird stuffer before he became the master photographer in 1862. So yes, Spalding's building has still retained its look. Looks slightly different today. There it is with the blue plaque on it. And you can see that the windows are still the same, but of course the ground floor, like a lot of buildings in the High Street, has changed over, but the top remains the same. This is nice because it's even got a floodlight on it, which I think is rather good. And there's a close-up of it. Apologies for not being quite pin sharp. This would not be acceptable by the Spaldings. Pin sharp photographs were something that would never be seen by the public. They believed on everything being absolutely top quality. And we know that between them, they produced over 7,000 of these pin sharp photographic plates, which are now resident in the Essex Record Office. And apparently, I've recently heard that they're going to be trying to digitize all of those so we can actually see them in all their splendor, which is really lovely. Now, when we came to the year 2020, there was really a swing over to the Marconi celebrations. And so one of the ladies that very prominently appeared for me was Winifred Sayer. Now, Winifred, see if I can move. Winifred was a really quite a prominent person with the early days of radio, or should I say wireless correctly. She was born in Enfield in 1897, and her father was a publican. They then moved from Burnt Mill in Harlow over to the Alma Inn in Springfield. And that's where Winifred spent her teenage years. Now, she found herself, although she was working in the pub in the evening, she also had another pastime, and that was singing. She was an extremely good amateur soprano. In the daytime, she worked for the Hoffman Ball Bearing Factory in their offices. But in the evening, she sang either solo or with a group called the Funyuns, run by Freddie Munyon of Munyon and Sons, the coach builders in Springfield. They formed a concert party which raised funds for local charity. Now, in 1920, January 1920, the Marconi Company were, with the help of Mr. W.T. Ditcham and Captain Henry J. Round, they were looking to experiment with speech entertainment over the radio, and they were trying to upgrade everything from the current communication of Morse code. One of the things they wanted to do, they got a special license under the call sign MZX to do experimental 30-minute broadcasts on the wireless. And they were looking for a suitable voice to fill that gap. Edward Cooper, who was a member of the Funyuns, suggested Winifred. Winifred was invited in at 10 shillings a night to sing in front of a crude microphone. And we're talking this one. This is not quite the original, but it's a very, very close replica. If you put the original next to this one, you wouldn't know the difference. Actually assembled by Tim Wander it's a telephone receiver and a cut up cigar box. But there it is. That's what she sang into. She tested all the equipment out. It all worked very well. She became Britain's first paid radio artiste. And the equipment that she tested out was later used by Dame Nellie Melba in her famous international broadcast on the 15th of June, 1920. After that particular episode in her life, Winifred went back to singing with the Funyuns. She sang solo for a little while. She got married in 1925 to a chap called Felix Collins, and they then their wedding reception was in the Plough at Springfield Road, which her father was then running. Felix later became the chief of Essex Special Constabulary, and they moved to a house in Marconi Road. Then they moved on to a house in Great Baddow called Wickham's, and eventually they moved to Woodford Road. And from Woodford Road, so this is the site that she was singing on, and the shed that she sang in was here, and these are the big masts that broadcast that famous broadcast later on with Dame Nellie. This is Winifred's plaque in Woodford, and you can see that it's it's very nicely positioned, but it's in a very obscure place. So we're looking at getting some information boards on the Marconi site to really highlight Winifred's achievements. An initiative really asked of me by the current Collins family, who really feel that she deserves her true place in history. So the next lady also worked for the Marconi Company, and this is Florence Attridge. Florence Attridge was born in Molsham Street and worked for initially for the Colonel Crompton, but later she transferred with her father and her brother over to the Marconi Company. She joined there in 1915, and in 1943 she was given a special task of supervising ladies in a secluded winding area for tuning coils. And the idea was that they were to produce these to a very high specification. They were to become part of a special radio set that was going to be used called the B2. And these ladies were working long hours, knitting together very thin copper wire under a magnifying glass. And this is the radio set that they were actually making the components for. And here we see some of the coils. Now, this particular radio set worked on a frequency from 3 to 16 megahertz. And because of the fine tuning, it had to have the coils replaced at various times to go with a full band width. And the coils would sit on this rider here. Here we have various things. We have the headphones. There's a Morse tapping set that goes with this. And also there is no speaker. It's all done through the headset. But you can see the whole thing is hidden inside an attaché case. This is for secret radio broadcast. This could easily be designated as a spy set and was assembled by the special operations division at Stone Park in West London. It was then sometimes parachuted with its owners into occupied territory. And we believe that these particular sets were used by the French resistance and our spy network in preparations for D-Day. Now, Florence had done a great job with the girls, and they produced all of these high-spec coils. she was actually given a British Empire medal for her contributions. And here we have a letter from the King to say, sorry I couldn't be there to present your award to you, but I hope you have future happiness. With this came another letter from the head of K3. K3 was the code-breaking section of British Naval Intelligence. So we know that she must have had some link with the people who were actually stationed at Bletchley Park. Now, this particular medal and the letters are now safely in the Chelmsford Museum, and it was Tim Wander, the well-known Marconi historian, who managed to buy these on eBay and put them into the museum. So well done, Tim. But then we didn't have a blue plaque for Florence. So I worked on that idea, and eventually we managed to get this one up just last year. And it really is down to a lady called Christine Norris, who was able to pinpoint Florence and her husband John's last address, which was 14 Andrews Place, just off Rainsford Road. And then working with the City Council, we then got this plaque up last year. And yes, very fine it is too. And we a very nice accolade to a lady that wasn't that well known, but we've now hopefully addressed that. Now, of course, Marconi year last year, we needed to really mention the man himself. And this involved the Saracens Head Hotel. Now, Pam Swaby's always had of the Chelmsford Civic Societies, always had a bit of an ambition that we need to recognise Mr. Marconi at the top of Chelmsford High Street. And funny enough, the Saracens Head Hotel was the place where he used to like to stay when he was in Chelmsford. Mr. Marconi had a bit taste for the very best hotels, so the Saracen in its time must have met the Marconi requirements. But this one was not actually put together by a city council. It was put together by the Chelmsford Civic Society, which meant that we had total control over the colour, the format, and also the wording as well. So we've got in 2 phrases there, which is really lovely, and also a little cameo of the man himself. No other blue plaque in Chelmsford has got that. So we are really quite pleased with this one. Yeah, and it looks really, really nice on there. And sort of a fitting way of remembering 2020, 100 years after Dame Nellie sang at New Street, but in the High Street instead of the New Street site. So that's all the ones that we currently have up actually in place. But let's talk about some proposed ones. And Christine Norris again and Stephen Norris really instigated the next one, which was to this chap, John Clough Thresh, Dr. John Clough Thresh, a straight-talking Yorkshireman who didn't really take anyone. He really did talk the right language, and he's in quite an imposing character. He was a pioneer in the early days of environmental hygiene, and he was apprenticed as a chemist, but his handwriting was too bad to be read, and so he became an environmental hygiene man instead. He qualified at London University, and he went up to Buxton to sort out some water purification problems there. He then came to Chelmsford in 1892 and became the Rural District Officer. He then, in 1895, got the job as the first County Council Medical Officer of Health. And he really changed the way that Chelmsford handled its water. He trained all his own chemists, all his own staff. They were all kept under John Clough's very close supervision, and he managed to tackle the likes of typhoid, cholera, and also tuberculosis as well. He was a really quite proficient worker, very hard worker. He really saw that you needed to worry about water purification, where you were extracting the water from. A lot of the Chelmsford water was coming from the river Chelmer. That was sometimes polluted. These guys were able to identify where that pollution was coming from. They even identified wells that were being used improperly. And also they then, as county, they also identified a big outbreak of typhoid in Southend. In fact, John Clough Fresh, in that particular situation, personally went down a well to investigate it and take samples. His legacy lives on today, and it's one of the reasons why we have a really good purification system for water in Chelmsford, all down to John Clough Fresh. Where did he live? He lived in a house in New London Road, which was originally called Spurgula. Spurgula is a herbal, is a medicine used as a herbal plant used in medicine. It later became Clarence House, and at the moment we're working with the owners on getting the blue plaque up there. We haven't quite got to the point of wording yet, but it's all looking pretty promising. And of course, what we try and do is make sure that it can be viewed from the road, because blue plaques need to be viewed so you can read the wording quite close up. So it's probably going to be on the side of the building when it actually appears, if it appears. The next chap is John Braithwaite. Now, John Braithwaite was originally working in his father's manufactory, and he became a skilled draftsman. In 1827, he met up with George and Robert Stevenson, and he constructed the first practical steam fire engine. Here we have it here. And he saw that the whole idea of a steam fire engine was really quite useful. This particular one could move 2 tons of water per minute and got up to steam in about 25 minutes. So with any luck, while it was being horse drawn to the fire, it was then getting up steam. This particular one was disliked because it was so efficient by the London Fire Brigade. However, it did put out some really big fires, and it was, the models were, there was 5 made. One ended up in Berlin, the other ended up in Liverpool. I'm not quite sure where the others were, but this one looks like a museum piece, and really quite a lovely piece of steam engineering. Now, he then realized that he could also design steam locomotives, and so he had a go at that. And this is one of his early steam locomotives, designed by his partner, and he, Ericsson was his name. And you can see it's quite a primitive model, but it is quite a, it looks quite functional and would do the job quite well. Now, in 1836, he switched over to become a draftsman, a civil engineer. And in that time, they were looking for someone to draw up and really survey the Eastern National Railway through Chelmsford, from Shoreditch, eventually to Norwich, and Yarmouth, via Colchester and Ipswich. And John Braithwaite switched over, surveyed that particular railway, and he then designed all of the bridges and viaducts that are on that railway. And he instigated the building of the viaduct across Chelmsford. This one, by the way, this is a proper photograph taken by my wife on a very rainy day when there was flooding in Central Park. But it's lovely the way it reflects the whole of the structure into the ground below as well. Now, the viaduct itself is on a curve. Braithwaite had a real problem with Chelmsford because he had to design a railway that went across the town over a floodplain and also 2 rivers. And he designed the archways that we now have, this viaduct being the biggest, but he also designed all the other bridges as well, and the whole thing's on a curve, which is really quite clever. Now, one of the things that he did with this railway was he actually designed it with a gauge of 7 feet in mind. Eventually, he came down to actually design it in 5 feet gauge, but at the time there was no actual standard for railway. But when you look at the railway from above over some of the bridges, you will see how much space he allowed to put that particular railway in there. It's interesting we're talking the engines, because John Braithwaite, on the day that this particular line was certified for passenger traffic, he drove the second railway train over this viaduct, which had the directors of the Eastern Railways Company on board. And he was on the footplate, and next to him was his wife. And they went through Chelmsford with all the flags waving and everybody cheering, and finally stopped at Colchester, where they had a nice buffet lunch to celebrate the Eastern Railways Company's opening. So a blue plaque for John Braithwaite, yes. And I think on this first arch here would be an ideal place. The design is now ready. All we need is Network Rail to give us the go-ahead to attach it to this lovely 18 arched viaduct. So the next person on the list is this lady, Beatrice Double OBE. Now, in her time, she was the first female president of the Chelmsford Star Co-op, a Labour County Councillor, and Chelmsford's first Lady Justice of the Peace. And she was born actually in Cambridgeshire and came to Chelmsford to live with her aunt and worked in the worked for Crompton's. She then went on, she met a young man there, and the two of them then decided to go and work for Hoffman's. She worked for Hoffman's. Hoffman's didn't like married couples working together at Hoffman's, and so she had to leave the company. She got a wedding present, and it was a cheque for a large amount of money that enabled her to use it for membership of the Women's Guild of the Chelmsford Star Co-op. And she joined that organisation and became one of their chief fundraisers and head of their education committee. She got involved with a number of initiatives with fundraising, but a big one was in 1940 when she was a key member of the Citizens Air Raid Committee, who petitioned the authorities to secure improved shelters, communal feeding arrangements, and suitable accommodation for the homeless. This petition contained 4,000 signatures and had the backing of 11 trade unions and 4 religious bodies. She was a lady that got things done. And eventually, for all her work, she was actually called up to the Buckingham Palace in 1966 and received the OBE. Now, one more interesting fact about Beatrice was that she actually died on the 31st of December 1999, aged 104. Some of the records say that she actually died in the year 2000, which would have meant that she actually was born in the 19th century and died in the 21st. A remarkable achievement for a lady. We're trying to get a blue plaque for her on this building. And where this time, City Council are not interested in, they don't think Beatrice is sufficiently famous enough to have a blue plaque. But if we can get the Chelmsford Star Co-op to put it on there, then the City Council have agreed that they can have it. So we're just waiting for Chelmsford Star Co-op to really come through the lockdown, come through all the COVID situations, return to normal trading, and then they will start to look at this. They said they want to do it, but they haven't got the time at the moment. But maybe one day it will appear. Another lady, that blue plaque candidate, is Barbara Dunn. Barbara Dunn, now you see, this is her call sign. She's a radio operator. She built her own radio. She lived in Liddesdon Hall in Stock, and she had the call sign G6YL. YL stands for young lady. She was the first British lady to hold an amateur radio transmitting license. And we think that she deserves a blue plaque. The people at Liddesdon Hall, that's now a group of apartments. They are now discussing whether that will be permitted or not. And it's very much with the owners whether it goes ahead. But here we see her radio equipment that she built. Her parents allowed her to drill through the window frame of her bedroom to allow the wires to be passed from the radio to large aerials on the outside of the building. Eventually she moved to Northumberland, and this is where we have, this is the Northumberland Acton House, Felton, Northumberland. This is her second license. We don't have a copy of her first one, but at least we have a picture of the lady. And yeah, she looks like a real fun lady, and one of the first you would have heard on the wireless. The next person, now this is an ongoing one at the moment. This is Godfrey Isaacs. Godfrey Isaacs was employed by Mr. Marconi as the managing director of the Hall Street factory, and Godfrey Isaacs was taken on by Marconi because he was a man who had great European network connections, business connections, and he spoke several languages, ideal for an international company like Marconi. But there was something about Isaacs that was a bit special. He was a real business, tremendous business energy enterpriser. And he not only turned around the production at Hall Street in 8 months, he also started to look at the litigation problems with the Marconi company and their inventories and their patents, and he managed to tie up legally a lot of the competitors and make it difficult for them to actually produce Marconi lookalike products. He was also the instigator of moving the entire company from Hall Street to New Street. This is the man that really had the vision of New Street being the manufacturing city. And also, we now know he was greatly involved with the wireless side of things, and he was involved with the Dame Nellie Melba broadcast. He got a bit tied up with the Marconi scandal in 1912, but in 1922, May 1922, he was called by the GPO to their head office to talk about a new concept called the British Broadcasting Company. And it was Godfrey Isaacs who dominated that particular meeting. We now have a copy of the minutes of that meeting. And it would seem that Godfrey Isaacs was the one that came up with the whole idea of the BBC annual license fee. It's a Godfrey Isaacs idea. And we think that that alone means that he should have a blue plaque, especially as he's also a Jewish gentleman as well. And we'd have no plaques to Jewish persons in Chelmsford. So I'm currently working and very optimistic that we will see a Godfrey Isaac blue plaque on the New Street site before the end of the summer, which is really quite fantastic, because it will be on the site that he thought should happen, and it was his brainchild, not Mr. Marconi's, that the manufacturing city and manufacturing complex that became Marconi New Street existed. So there we are. Now, I've just got another chap that we're going to add into the mix, and that is this chap here. Because Christine Norris has again been working with me, and we've managed to point out and find the location of the man that was involved with both Winifred Sayer and the Dame Nellie Melba broadcast, and it's William Theodore Ditcham. Now, we found where he lived. It was called Tudor House, and it was in Broomfield Road, and we've got the number now. City Council are now approaching the owners, and there's a good possibility that that blue plaque could appear in Broomfield Road, which is really great because it means that we've got another nod to the Marconi Company. This man was the man who first started reading the news on the radio. He's just as important as Winifred, Dame Nellie Melba, and her other friend, Captain Peter Eckersley, who broadcast from Writtle. But that's Writtle 2022, and that's another story. So